Good morning. Myself P. Balakrishna from EC department in Ramchandra Engineering College. So yesterday we can discussion in the pulse code modulation, how to define pulse code modulation and transmit and receiver side. Now okay, discussion today delta modulation. So how to define delta modulation and how to define transmit and receiver. So here you can observe that simply the operations and principles of delta modulation. So here mainly the delta modulation you can find out the step size is a fixed. The difference between the input signal x of t and staircase approximated signal confined to two levels, that is the positive to negative levels, that is my plus delta to minus delta. If the difference is a positive, the approximately the signal is increased by one step, that is delta. So here to clearly can explain that is the transmitted side either 0 or 1 side, that is increasing the step size that 0 level to 1 level, that is simply to find out the transmitted level signal. And one more thing here you can observe that the graphical representation of the delta modulation here to find out the continuous signal, that is step by step signal. Here you can observe that this is the staircase signals. We can find out simply to increase one by one, that is continuous x of t signal, there is a step size signal. So here find out the sampling period of the each pulse. Now you can create the pulse, that is a sampling pulse, to find out the duration of the pulse period. So here the principles of delta modulation can be explained by the following set of equations. Also have find out the how to find out the delta modulation also. Here you can observe that simply the equation of the delta modulation here to find out the error at present samples and sample signals of x of t. So last samples approximately the staircase waveform also. Here the relation of you can find out the relation of the each equation can easily to mention that error. So simply to find out that error in the input equation. Here the delta modulation is simply the staircase signals, that is high and low signals. High and low signals. Simply to find out that signal in the delta modulation cases, that is the error of the input signal. Here we can observe that one more equation is here the one is transmitted and 0 is a transmitted, that is plus and minus delta, that is simply to positive to negative case and negative to positive case. Here the TS is a sampling intervals of the pulse, input pulse signal, that is simply to identify the staircase signals of the delta modulation. And now we can explain that the continuation of the delta modulation is to find out the transmitter of the delta modulation. How to define transmitter of the delta modulation? Here we can observe that to find out that plus or minus delta with the previous sample approximation, this is given present sample signal here to continuous signal, that is UNTS, that is the adding of the plus delta. We are adding of the continuous, that is U of n. U of n is a step signals. You can easily to find out that unit sample signals. Here adding the plus and minus delta signal. And also you can observe that this is simply the block diagram of the accumulators. Here the summation of the input signal, that is the delay of the sample TS. Here to release the some error signal, that error signals can apply to the 1-bit quantizer. Here to finally output will be the average values of the input can be released that. And one more thing here also, delta modulation receiver side, there is a transmitter. Here the receiver side input can receive the summation of the delay time. Here the delay time is applied to the TS and you can release the unit pulse, that is that pulse are applied to the low pass filter. Here low pass filter are using simply to filterize the input signal and deliver the output. So here the output is a delta modulation, that is simply with a comparison of the input and output of the delta modulation. and also we can explain that continuation of that equation also, DM receiver, delta modulation receiver. So already we can discuss the block diagram. So simply the receiver side is simply to transmit it, that is input is applied to the summation, that time can apply the delay time also. So both signals are applied to the low pass filter. Here filter is simply to filterize the input signal to deliver the output of the delta modulation signal. That is, we can apply to the input signal. That input signal simply to convert it the delta modulation with the help of low pass filter. So this is simply delta modulation and delta receiver. So this is both are using digital system devices. And one more thing, are using advantage and disadvantage of delta modulation. So many advantages are available in delta modulation. Here one by one we can explain that delta modulation transmit only one bit for one sample, that is either 1 or 0. This is the signaling rate and transmission channel bandwidth is q small for delta modulation. And one more thing, the transmitter and receiver implementations is very much simply for delta modulation. So this is the disadvantage of the delta modulation. Here you can observe that here to find out the step by step signals, that is to find out that average of the two samples per, that is a staircase of the pulse signal. So here observe that value is the delta here, and also we can comparison of the created one sample duration of the pulse, that is a TS signals. So we can comparison of the both of the duration. So automatically to increase the some sample and to created the some sample pulse. So this is the drawback of the delta modulation signal. So next we can explain the continuation of the another signal, that is step overlapped. Already you can explain a step overlapped and hamming also there. So this also are drawbacks in the delta modulation. And one more applicable of the delta modulation is a adaptive delta modulation. So using adaptive or using in the delta modulation at the transmit side and receiver side to increase the some step level and to increase the some speed of the data. Here also we can explain that, and this is externally adding the delta modulation. External we can adding the delta modulation, that is a step will be simply to reduce it. Step size will be simply to reduce it that. So here transmit side and receiver side both side are using the adaptive. Here we can observe that simply the block diagram. Here are using the adaptive side, that is simply to input signal is applied and delay time is also applied, and 1 bit can applied. Here applied to the summation, another external sum are using that delay of the time and output side. Here using simply step size controlling, that is simply to increase the step size, that is reduce the step size. You are using adaptive simply to reduce the step size process. Here also receiver side also using the accumulators are also using that. So output is low pass filter, delay time, and input side are using the adapter, that is the logic for step size control. Simply the adapter is a controlling of the input bins. And also transmitters and receivers both block diagram are using the adapter. So the adapter is simply to controlling the steps and reduce the speed also. So this is simply to comparison of the adaptive of the delta modulation and adaptive of the delta modulation transmitter and delta modulation receiver. So here three is also same. We can explain that. And here also you can study that graphical, how to define that graphical in the delta modulation. Here we can observe that simply the graphical of the input and output stages of the delta modulation. Here you can observe that amplitude and frequency. Simply you can find out that samples of the every pulse, that is a step size pulse, that is a reduce of the step size pulse. You can find out the duration of the time, that is a TS, that is a sample size of the every frequency. Okay, so next lesson we can explain it tomorrow. Thank you one and all.